Hello, this is Erin Brown, ELA consultant at the Muskegon Area ISD. I was working recently with a group of teachers, and we thought that it would be helpful to create some simple anytime, anywhere videos around the MAISA, Michigan Association of Intermediate School Administrators, the new writing units that are out this year in Michigan. Um, so this PowerPoint and this recording is an attempt to encapsulate all of the great writing practices that teachers are employing right now around the new Common Core aligned writing units. So in trying to capture in planning with these teachers this kind of instruction, we know that a PowerPoint will be very limited. This is definitely not effective professional development. At the same time, we did want to name some of the essential pieces that are important when implementing units of study for writing specifically aligned to the Common Core. So when we think about balanced writing instruction, really what we're talking about are many components of balanced literacy or a comprehensive literacy program, and how a writing workshop would fit within that. Knowing that it's not all we do, and it's not all we do for writing as well. Yet these teacher created and piloted and teacher led MAISA writing units are to be taught through a writing workshop model. And when you pick up the MAISA writing units, it would be very difficult to know all of the instructional practices that are essential without having some background in some of the research and pedagogy behind a student-centered writing instructional classroom. So, in a writing workshop or any writing process class, there is a lot of time for students to write. Before that, there's a direct explicit mini lesson, and after that, there is an explicit share time to tie back to the mini lesson. Anytime we put time limits or time recommendations within chunks of instruction, we know that there'll probably be anomalies and situations where these time limits are not appropriate. But the reason why we would say 5 to 10 minutes is because really when we think about a mini lesson, we do want it to stay mini. We do want to make sure that we're providing a lot of time for students to actually try and do the work that we're teaching them around the Common Core writing standards. And within the independent writing time, we're not only checking for application of what we've taught in the mini lesson and mini lessons before, but we're conferring with students to individually coach their own application of the writing skills. We also pull small groups of students to sometimes work smarter and confer with multiple students at once if there's a common need. And so throughout this, we're using the formative assessment process to differentiate our writing instruction, and then again tie up the block of writing time with a teaching share. But just a little bit more on that mini lesson, thinking about how the direct explicit instruction of writing happens, because in the MESA writing units you will find that much of the guidance is around the mini lesson. The lessons themselves are truly about how you could teach at your specific grade level, thinking about this Common Core text type, how you would teach that directly and explicitly for students in a gradual release of responsibility model. So again, that time range is different based on topic and skill. We try for mini lessons to be about the number of minutes that an average student is old in a class. So if you have a second grade class, your target time for your mini lesson might be around 7 or 8 minutes. And we know the real world happens. And sometimes in our teaching of a mini lesson, we might use a mentor text we've read before, and we might show how we've done it in our own writing. So sometimes, like the teaching portion of the mini lesson is a little bit longer, or the active engagement portion might not just be a writing in the air opportunity. It might be that students are actually taking out their writing right there in the moment while they're near you and doing a bit of that work. And so, again, guidelines and not um, set in stone. The reason why we would say that for third grade and up, we would try to keep a mini lesson to around 10 minutes. Again, I say that with a grain of salt because we all try to stay mini with our instruction. The reason is because we want to keep our direct teaching around a third to three quarters, excuse me, to be about a quarter to a third of the time in a writing workshop. We do want the majority of the time to be for students to use what we've taught them and for us to be able to coach them in that moment. And that's where we find the most growth in writing proficiency is when students have more time to practice and when the coaching in that setting is very tight and we are keeping track of what we're teaching students. So, a little bit more. Mini lessons are placed within a unit of study. So, you might have in front of you one of these MAISA units, and you'll know that the teachers who wrote these units and piloting these units and are continuing um, to improve and improve upon the work of other teachers as we stand on the shoulders of many writing experts in our state and beyond. All of these mini lessons have been very planned out to fit within a progression of a unit of study. The learning is scaffolded and it builds one upon the other as far as days are concerned. At the same time, teachers are encouraged to add mini lessons whenever needed to adjust the learning target of a day's lesson when student data suggests that's necessary, and to use these resources as needed, knowing that the teacher is the wise practitioner in the classroom and can use the data that they're collecting to guide that direct instruction. We know that the gradual release of responsibility method is essential, especially when we think about the Common Core and the progression of these standards across the grades. So even the progression of, for example, writing standard 1, opinion argument writing across the grades, that is actually scaffolded from kindergarten through 12th grade. At the same time, our units are scaffolded and we connect to previous learning across even one unit of study within one grade level. Students are actively practicing right within the mini lesson so that we have that opportunity for formative assessment before we even release them to do the work independently. So there's two different groups we think about during the independent writing time. We think about the students and we think about the adults in the room who are teaching into the writing work that students are doing once we send them off. Students are planning what they'll write. They're practicing the skill from the mini lesson and or past teaching as applicable depending on where they might be in the writing process. They're choosing the details of what they write, how they craft the writing, and how they revise for meaning. And choice is an essential ingredient for retention and for students to be fully engaged in the process and the skills at work. Students are writing. They're writing again across the writing process. They're writing long and strong each day, and that stamina builds fluency and again builds student achievement in writing so that at any point in their day, in their educational day, or outside of it, students feel like writing is for me. I have skills to be able to respond to my world through writing, and I can do that quickly and efficiently. So depending on grade level and the step in the writing process, students are provided their own writing resources. At some grade levels, that's writing notebooks. At others, it's writing folders. And those types of resources are determined within a curricular resource that you might be using and suggested. And at the same time, you're finding what works for your students. Students are also sharing their writing and their thinking processes during this independent writing time with their partners and with groups, and that's usually encouraged by the teacher as far as when they would be doing that sharing, and it's near the end of the independent writing time. But at the same time, the independent writing block of your writing instruction will not be pin drop silent. As in any work environment, any lab environment in the professional worlds that our students will join once they graduate, it's not about silent silence equaling quality. Students are going to need to work and need to interact, and we are going to maybe hear that slow, quiet buzz as students are doing that work and as we're supporting them. So the teacher's role, as we've mentioned before, are to be conferring with students, different students each day. Sometimes teachers have a plan of how they will account to themselves of conferring with the multiple students in their class over the course of a week or a couple weeks. During that conference with one student, the teacher gives their full attention to the student. So we think about the kind of classroom management essentials for a teacher to be able to focus on one student during this time. A conference is about 3 to 5 minutes sometimes with one student, and the launching units of these units or other units that you might use all are developing that learning community so that students are independent and are able to solve their problems so that you can focus on one writer at a time. When we confer, we try to keep in mind a certain process that's also a gradual release of responsibility process where we sit down near the writer and we begin to just notice what they're already doing. Sometimes that's called the research section of a conference. And really we're asking, how's it going for you in your writing? Read a little bit of what you're doing right now. What are you thinking about? This research time can take a little bit of time because we're really gathering a lot of information. This is truly, again, a formative assessment process. We might be jotting a couple notes about things that students are doing well, a couple ideas of what we could teach them, and within that process, we're also coming to a decision about one possible next step to teach the writer. This is hard. This is the art of conferring, and none of us really ever feel like we arrive at this. What could be the one thing that's going to move this writer forward? When we're deciding on that, there are many things that we think about. We think about what we have been teaching through this unit and previous units. We think about our past conference notes with this one student and what we have worked on in the past because maybe we're building on that. And we also think about any specifics that this writer might specifically need, any things that we have noticed through assessment that we want to encourage in this moment. It's so important that we name to the students what they are doing well. When we do that, they truly own their abilities and they continue on with what they're doing well. So it's an easy piece to skip, but it is extremely important to compliment or even name. And you'll see these underlined notice, name, and nudge. That's sometimes an easier way to think about a conference for us. But during this time when we name what they're already doing, we use language like, I notice you did this as a writer. How did that work for you? And as a reader, it works for me because, and we name what they did, how strong it was, and we encourage them to keep going with that. And then we add an and, not a but because we don't want to negate what they've been doing. We add an and we say, and can I teach you one more thing? Or may I give you a tip today? And in that is the power of nudging the writer to a next step. So we teach within this short conference. And again, our ideas for what we teach the student are coming from the research time, they're coming from their writing, their past writing, and previous assessment information. We teach one simple thing. We show them how it could happen in their writing. We have them do this work. They're holding the pen. We're not taking over their writing and putting these ideas. They might take a sticky note and pop that idea down right there in that text so that they can do more work. We might come back after a few minutes after we've conferred with a couple other kids and see how it's going, or we might make note to check on that next time. During this time, teachers are also sometimes thinking about ways to use their time effectively, and a strategy group is one way that teachers are finding this to be helpful, where it's really a conference with a few students. We're pulling together a few kids at a time who all need support around a common skill. And these strategy groups go very much like a conference. Hey guys, I've pulled you together because I've noticed this that you're already doing in your writing. Keep doing that. And I want to show you one more thing you could try. Maybe we have a mentor text that we've all read before and we've all noticed before. And this mentor text gives us one more tip in our writing we can do. And before we send those kiddos off, they do that work right there with us, and we can coach that group right there, almost like the coaching that happens within a guided reading lesson. But we're right there able to teach and tightly instruct the small group of students before we send them back to their own independent writing work. When we think about these three components of our writing process classroom, the mini lesson, the big chunk of independent writing time, and then the share, this is a very powerful time. We're bringing focus back to the teaching point, back to the learning target of the day before wrapping up our writing time. And during the share time, there are many ways the teacher can do it, and it all depends on purpose. So the teacher could reconvene the entire group back to the meeting area for proximity, recall the teaching point or the chart work that was done, invite some students to share the work that they did in relation to that learning target. And that might have been determined ahead of time. So, based on the students that you worked with during the independent writing time, you might have a couple that you've asked previously, would you mind sharing during our share time, and gotten that permission. Sometimes we just, right where the students are, we just stop and we name that there's one student we'd like to share what they did, and again, they know that it's coming. And sometimes our share is having partners or small groups turn to each other right there and share a portion of their writing that they were working on. Sometimes that can be very guided by the teacher. Now, this isn't the only time we're interrupting the writing. Prior to this, during the independent writing and conferring time, when students are writing and thinking and teachers are conferring, there's another small piece called a mid-workshop teaching point or a mid-workshop interruption. It's not here in the notes, but this would happen about halfway through the independent writing time. We start to notice that buzz and we realize kids need maybe a little bit of a refocus. We bring attention back to the task at hand or add a new layer of thinking to the work or share one thing that a student did to apply some of the learning and invite students to do that same work. A couple more pieces that the teachers and I thought would be essential to talk about, and again, this is far from effective professional development to just be talking through this, but if you're already doing some of these pieces, then you can rest assured that you're not the only one. These are things that teachers have talked about as essential for this type of student-centered work. A classroom usually contains a meeting area. We pull students together. We usually have chart paper, a place for students to sit around near the teacher where we can have close proximity and really look into the eyes of the students that we're teaching and and have that ability to assess in the moment the understanding and adjust teaching as necessary. Again, there are anchor charts that we use. Some we start to create ahead of time, but quite often this is co-created with students. Simple, tight language around the learning that we're using so that they have these resources to reference as they're working independently. There are mentor texts, there are suggested mentor texts within units of study, and at the same time, teachers know the texts that work for them to show the writing craft elements. So while a text might be recommended in a unit, teachers can also go to their bookshelf and pull other texts off that would have the exact same kind of writing and would work just as well. So we always encourage teachers to really be empowered to choose their own mentor texts. Those will often be the best for them. Other writing resources for the writers are necessary, and again, those are often described within the unit themselves because these are grade specific quite often, or at least age specific. And then just this piece that's not tangible, um, but it's palpable in a classroom that is so student-centered and is all about rigorous, high expectations for all writers. There's a sense of inquiry, a sense of passionate about writing and communicating to the rest of the world your ideas and thinking through the best ways to do that. And that really encapsulates the Common Core state standards. The type of writing that's encouraged and the type of rigorous environment that is held up through standards like Standard 5, where writing and teachers are coaching writers and peers are coaching writers to improve their pieces. And Standard 10, naming the importance of writing in multiple ways across the writing process. These standards remind us of the importance of truly believing that all students are able to rise to this level of proficiency through the type of tight collaborative environment that's expected. So there are classroom expectations to be developed and practiced and owned by all in the environment, and one would be transitions between whole group and independent work. The roles that were previously named during the mini lesson, the conferences, the independent work, and the expectation that students will be writers, and that can't be told, that has to be modeled. When a teacher feels like they are trying this writing sincerely in front of and with their students, and negotiating through the choices that writers make when we think about the craft elements of the Common Core, quite often those A, B, C, D underneath Standard 1, 2, and 3. When a writer when a teacher is a writer in a classroom, they exemplify the type of perseverance, the type of desire to practice, and that becomes contagious. So, really, the expectation is that all in the classroom are writers, all are thinking hard about the best ways to communicate their information, and that is an environment of rigor and work that is measurable and is, again, contagious. So, a final thought is that our ideas around writing assessment are really evolving. We know more now than in the past, and we have a lot still to learn. But one thing that we're thinking about in education right now is this idea of balanced assessment. Rick Stiggins and Jan Chapui have written some seminal works on the idea of balanced assessment, so that we aren't only doing the summative work, the assessment of learning, maybe the end of unit piece that gets published and celebrated, but we're also assessing for learning and changing instruction in the moment based on the data that we're collecting with students. So, one thing on top of the conferring and the noticing during the mini lesson, in all the ways that we're adjusting our instruction based on data right in the heart of workshop, we also are thinking about on-demand writing a lot lately, and how we could give a generic prompt to a class or all classes at a grade level in a building and have the students do their very best writing within one or two settings with multiple pieces of paper stapled together and encouraged to do their best, uh, with one text type of writing, and then using that and some assessment resources aligned with the Common Core to make some decisions about how units could go, the kind of ways that we could alter the units in front of us to best meet this population of students. So that is one piece that is formative because it can be done prior to a unit or at the beginning of the school year and can absolutely impact the way that the instruction unfolds in a classroom or in a building based on data. It also can be summative because not only at the end of the unit is a student across the writing process, fixing and fancying and celebrating one piece, and we have unit assessments for that, rubrics for that. A student could also, at the end of a unit on a text type or later on in the year, could also be doing another on demand with maybe a similar or the same prompt, and now showing what they can do. And we as teachers are hoping that they bring all of the skills that they've retained to that experience, and we're able to measure their growth from the previous and the final on-demand piece for one text type. So when we think about the fact that we are at K5 doing opinion writing, informational explanatory writing, and narrative writing, an on-demand assessment could be done pre for each of those text types and post maybe at the end of the year or at the end of the units that are around that text type. So this on-demand writing piece I think is really the newest piece for us, and it is a true way to measure, again, student retention of the instruction that we've been delivering and to guide the next steps for our teaching. So if you are watching this video because you are starting to look at the MAISA writing units, there is a website, and you can also Google Oakland Atlas Rubicon or MAISA Atlas Rubicon and come to the units, but I'm going to click on this tiny URL and it's going to bring me to a Rubicon site. And you may already know how to navigate through this, but there are two pieces that you would want to filter to find your grade level in the units that are available currently. You'll choose under by school, Common Core, and then by grade, let's try second grade, and you'll browse. Those are the only two pieces that you need to select to browse, because then the choices are pretty limited. You have math, reading, writing. So today, clicking on writing, any of the blue text is a hyperlink. You have one possible pacing of writing units that have been created through this statewide collaborative. And again, as named in these resources, this is one pacing. Districts will need to choose their own pacing. They'll need to choose what they've previously used and any other unit resources and determine their pacing for their grade level, knowing again that pacing is going to be based on the groups. At the same time, if we stick with one or two units far longer than is suggested, we're going to be sticking with one text type far longer than possibly necessary, and then we're not balancing across the three text types and across the year. But if we think about this first unit, all we do is click on it. So this is the second grade launching unit, and then you have the unit itself. You have a graphic organizer to read through the unit or a unit abstract, and pretty much the same information is provided in both. You have the Common Core standards that are addressed and the depth at which they're addressed through this unit. You have essential questions that are also exemplified in that graphic organizer, and these essential questions really framed the work through the backwards design model to create the lessons themselves within this unit. You have assessment tasks, and even if you're not a kindergarten through second grade teacher, you're going to find the resources within this formative assessment overview link here or the formative assessment packet. You're going to find these very valuable. You will be encouraged, because many of the practices that you probably already employ as a differentiated teacher of writing, you're going to notice that these are named here in these resources, but you're also going to have more tips on how to use the formative assessment process through this work to get to the rigor of the Common Core writing standards. And then you'll have a unit at a glance with the sessions, the teaching points, which absolutely are learning targets as well, right here at a glance in a list. The professional resources are on the right, and then you have two links, and the videos to follow will be one teacher to teacher talking about the resources that are attached, both the supplemental resources and then especially the lesson plans. And when we click on the lesson plans at the bottom of any of these units, a Word document opens and we have the specifics of how, again, a group of teachers have written and then tried, another group of teachers have tried this type of instruction, and the tips and the things that you'll want to think about as you move through this type of a unit with your own students. So thanks again. This content was created in collaboration with real teachers, again for the hope of supporting the work that you're already doing. And as we know, both from the professional learning that has already started around these MAISA units, this is absolutely a work in progress. We are trying the very best we know currently, knowing that we will improve simply because we have a new collaborative model for the state. Teachers leading teachers, and this is the kind of learning that we need as we move forward for all of our students around this work. So thank you for your time, and thank you especially to the teachers who are opening up their practice in their classrooms for us to continue to get smarter together.